My father knew I was his son, but let my family humiliate me to hide my mom's affair. So I exposed the truth and watched it all fall apart. At 28, I thought I'd outgrown the excitement of Christmas morning, but there was something comforting about maintaining these family traditions. My name is Brandon, and I've always been the odd one out in the Johnson family. My sister Allison had piercing blue eyes and mom's auburn hair, while my brother Trevor inherited dad's tall, lanky frame and mom's sharp wit. I, however, ended up with dark brown hair, hazel eyes, and a stockier build that made me look like I belonged to a completely different gene pool. Growing up, the jokes were constant but seemingly harmless. The milkman's kid, they'd tease, or, maybe you're adopted. I'd laugh along, assuming it was just typical sibling ribbing. As I got older though, the comments became more pointed, more cruel. During family gatherings, relatives would make snide remarks about how I didn't look like a Johnson. In high school, when I struggled with math while Allison and Trevor excelled, Dad would shake his head and mutter, "I don't know where you get it from, certainly not from me." Mom would just shrug and say, "Some people are just different, I suppose." The emotional distance grew over the years. When I graduated college with a degree in engineering, Dad barely looked up from his newspaper. When Allison got her liberal arts degree, he threw her a party. When Trevor landed his first job at a marketing firm, Dad couldn't stop bragging to the neighbors. When I got promoted to senior engineer at a tech company, earning more than both my siblings combined, the response was a lukewarm, "That's nice, dear," from Mom. I tried to convince myself it didn't matter. I had my own life, my own apartment, my own success. Deep down, though, the constant feeling of being on the outside looking in wore on me. I craved their acceptance, their approval, their love, the kind they seemed to give so freely to Allison and Trevor. That Christmas morning started like any other. Allison, now 31, and a high school English teacher, was perched on the couch in her perfectly coordinated Christmas sweater, looking like she'd stepped out of a holiday catalog. Trevor, 25 and still living at home while finding himself, was sprawled on the floor in his pajamas, surrounded by expensive electronics that Dad had bought him. Mom, Linda, was bustling around in her festive apron, playing the perfect hostess. Dad, Robert, sat in his leather recliner like a king surveying his domain. The gift exchange proceeded normally at first. Allison gave Mom a spa day package. Trevor gave Dad a bottle of expensive whiskey. I gave everyone thoughtful, personalized gifts that I'd spent weeks selecting. Their gifts to me were clearly afterthoughts. A generic gift card here, a random book there, nothing that suggested they'd put any real thought into what I might actually want or need. Then Allison reached under the tree and pulled out a small, wrapped box, the kind that usually contained jewelry or something precious. She had a strange smile on her face as she handed it to me. "This one's special, Brandon," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "I think it's something you really need to see." I unwrapped it carefully, my heart actually skipping a beat because for a moment I thought, maybe this is it. Maybe this is the gesture that will show me I'm truly part of this family. Inside the box was a paternity test kit. The room went dead silent except for the Christmas music playing softly in the background. I stared at the kit, my brain struggling to process what I was seeing. Then Allison spoke again, her voice now cold and sharp. "So you remember you're not part of this family." The words hit me like a physical blow. I looked up at her expecting to see some sign that this was a cruel joke, but her face was stone-cold serious. That's when Dad started laughing. Not a chuckle, not a nervous giggle, but full-blown hysterical laughter. He was doubled over in his chair, slapping his knee like this was the funniest thing he'd ever seen. "Oh, that's rich," he wheezed between laughs. "That's absolutely perfect, Allison." Mom chimed in then, her voice filled with a satisfaction that made my blood run cold, finally proving what we always knew. Trevor, not to be outdone, looked up from his pile of gifts and sneered at me. "Time to face reality, outsider." I sat there, holding the paternity test kit, feeling like the world had just shifted beneath my feet. This wasn't spontaneous cruelty, this was planned. They had discussed this. They had bought this kit specifically to humiliate me on Christmas morning. The three people I'd spent my entire life trying to win over had just delivered the most devastating blow they could think of, and they were enjoying every second of it. "Use it," Allison said, leaning forward with gleaming eyes. "Let's finally put this question to rest once and for all." "Yeah," Trevor added. "We're all dying to know just how much of an outsider you really are." Dad was still chuckling, wiping tears from his eyes. "This is the best Christmas gift ever, Allison. Absolutely brilliant." Mom nodded approvingly. It's about time someone addressed the elephant in the room. I looked around at their faces, these people who were supposed to love me, supposed to be my family, and I saw nothing but contempt, amusement, and satisfaction at my pain. Something inside me broke in that moment, but something else also crystallized. A cold, calculating part of my brain that I'd never accessed before suddenly came online. I stood up slowly, still holding the paternity test kit. "You know what?" I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "You're absolutely right. It's time we address the elephant in the room." I walked over to my coat, which was hanging by the door, and reached into the inner pocket. I pulled out a small black box, the kind that expensive jewelry comes in, and walked back to Dad's chair. "Before we do my test," I said, handing him the box, "I have one more gift for you, Dad. I think you should open it first." Dad took the box, still grinning from his earlier laughter. "What's this, some kind of peace offering?" he asked mockingly. "Something like that," I replied. "Why don't you open it and see?" The room fell quiet again as Dad lifted the lid of the black box. Inside, nestled in black velvet, was a single sheet of paper, folded small. Dad unfolded it, and I watched as his face went from amused to confused to absolutely horrified. His hands began to tremble so violently that the paper was shaking. "What is it, Robert?" Mom asked, moving closer to look over his shoulder. Dad's face had gone completely white. He looked up at me with an expression I'd never seen before, pure, unadulterated terror. "Where did you get this?" he whispered. "The same place I got the other copies," I said calmly. "And the same place I got the photos and the videos." Mom snatched the paper from Dad's trembling hands and read it. I watched as her face went through the same transformation, confusion, recognition, horror. She actually gasped and stumbled backward. "What is it?" Allison demanded. "What's on that paper?" I looked at my sister and brother, both of whom were now sitting up straight, sensing that something had shifted dramatically in the room. "It's a DNA test," I said simply, "but not the kind you were expecting." The paper in that box was the result of a paternity test I'd secretly conducted 6 months earlier. I wasn't the subject being tested, Dad was. The results showed that Trevor, the golden child, the baby of the family, the one who looked most like Dad, wasn't actually Dad's biological son. That wasn't even the best part, though. The best part was how I discovered this information in the first place. You see, I work in tech, and I'm very good at what I do. When you're good at tech, you develop certain skills that extend beyond your day job. Skills that involve accessing information that people think is private. Skills that involve finding things that people thought were buried forever. About 8 months ago, I'd finally gotten tired of being treated like an outsider in my own family. I decided to do some digging, thinking maybe I'd find some old family documents or photos that would help me understand why I felt so disconnected from these people. What I found instead was so much better. I found Mom's old email accounts, all of them, including the ones from 26 years ago that she thought had been deleted forever. Those emails contained a very steamy, very explicit correspondence with a man named Marcus Rivera. The correspondence was dated exactly 9 months before Trevor was born. It included photos, lots of photos, and detailed discussions about their affair and how Mom was going to pass off Marcus's baby as her husband's. Marcus wasn't just any random guy. Marcus Rivera was Robert's business partner and best friend, the man who had been Trevor's godfather, the man who had mysteriously moved across the country right after Trevor was born and had never been seen or heard from again. Once I had that information, it was easy enough to track down Marcus. He was living in California now, married with kids of his own, and apparently had no idea that he'd left a son behind in Ohio. The investigation process had taken me months of careful, methodical work. I'd started by creating fake social media profiles to connect with people who might have known Marcus during his time in Ohio. I'd combed through old business records, newspaper archives, and even high school yearbooks. Every lead I followed painted a clearer picture of what had really happened 26 years ago. Marcus Rivera hadn't just been Dad's business partner, he'd been his best friend since college. They'd started their construction company together, built it from nothing into a successful enterprise. Marcus had been the best man at Mom and Dad's wedding. He'd been at every family barbecue, every holiday gathering, every important milestone in their lives, until suddenly, he wasn't. The emails I'd recovered painted a vivid picture of the affair. It had started innocently enough. Mom complaining about feeling neglected while Dad worked long hours building the business, Marcus offering a sympathetic ear, then a shoulder to cry on, then much more. The messages showed a passionate, intense relationship that had lasted 6 months, 6 months of secret meetings, elaborate lies to cover their tracks, and increasingly desperate declarations of love. The most damning emails came toward the end of the affair. Mom had discovered she was pregnant, and the timing made it clear that Marcus could be the father. The messages showed her panic, Marcus's initial desire to tell Robert the truth, and Mom's desperate pleas for him to keep quiet. The final email in the chain was from Mom, telling Marcus that she'd convinced Robert the baby was his and that Marcus needed to disappear if he truly loved her. "If you really care about me and Robert's friendship, you'll leave," she'd written. "Let us have our family. Let Robert believe this baby is his. It's the only way we can all move on from this mistake." Marcus's response had been heartbreaking. "I'll go, but Linda, that's my child you're carrying. Someday I hope you'll tell him the truth. He deserves to know who his real father is." Mom's final message had been cold and definitive. "No, he'll be a Johnson, not a Rivera. That's what's best for everyone." When I contacted Marcus and explained the situation, he was initially skeptical. When I sent him photos of Trevor, though, the resemblance was unmistakable. The same dark hair, the same deep-set brown eyes, the same square jawline that I'd always thought Trevor had inherited from some distant Johnson relative. Marcus agreed to a DNA test, and while we waited for the results, we talked for hours over video calls. He told me about the life he'd built in California, how he'd tried to forget about Ohio but had never stopped wondering about the child he'd left behind. He'd married a wonderful woman named Rosa, had 2 daughters and built a successful contracting business, but he'd always felt like something was missing. "I think about that baby every year on his birthday," Marcus had told me during one of our conversations. "I've wanted to reach out so many times, but I made a promise to your mother. I thought I was doing the right thing by staying away." When the DNA results came back, showing a 99.98% probability that Marcus was Trevor's biological father, he broke down crying on our video call. 25 years of wondering, of guilt, of what if had finally been answered. Marcus wasn't the only family secret I'd uncovered during my investigation. The deeper I dug into my family's history, the more lies I discovered. I found out that Dad had always suspected Trevor wasn't his biological son. The physical differences that I'd attributed to genetic variation were actually glaring evidence that Robert had been ignoring for years. Rather than confront the truth, he'd chosen to live in denial and take out his frustrations on me, the son who actually was his biological child. The most damaging discovery came when I found Dr. Henderson's old medical records through an unexpected source. My cousin Jenny worked as a records clerk at the medical practice, and during a casual conversation at a family barbecue earlier that year, she'd mentioned seeing my name in some old files. She thought it was funny that Dad had requested a private consultation about my blood test results when I was 16. When I pressed her for details, she revealed that Dr. Henderson had kept detailed notes about Dad's unusual reaction to learning I was definitely his biological son. Patient's father seemed distressed by confirmation of paternity, the doctor had written, requested that results not be shared with other family members. When asked why, Father stated that some truths are better left buried, recommended family counseling, but Father declined. Dad had spent 12 years knowing I was his biological son while letting the family treat me like an outsider. He'd even encouraged it. Every joke about the milkman, every comment about how I didn't look like a Johnson, every moment when he'd made me feel like I didn't belong, he'd known it was all based on a lie, and he'd let it continue. The worst part was realizing why he'd done it. In his twisted logic, if he could make everyone believe I wasn't really his son, then he could justify treating Trevor like his real heir. He could pour all his paternal love and attention into the boy he knew wasn't actually his biological child while rejecting the son who actually was. I also discovered that the financial disparities I'd noticed over the years weren't accidental. Dad had been systematically favoring Trevor in ways I'd never fully realized. Trevor's college fund had been 3 times larger than mine. When Trevor had gotten into car accidents, Dad had paid for the repairs and insurance increases without question. When I'd needed help with my student loans, Dad had told me it would build character to pay them off myself. The business that Dad and Marcus had built together, Dad had never properly dissolved the partnership after Marcus left. According to the original partnership agreement I'd found in Dad's old files, Marcus was still legally entitled to a share of the business assets. The construction company that Dad had always claimed he'd built with his own 2 hands was actually worth millions, and Marcus had never received a penny of what he was owed. More importantly, Dad had been actively concealing Marcus's continued legal ownership stake and had been fraudulently operating as the sole owner for 25 years. This gave me another layer of leverage that I hadn't even planned on. Not only could I expose the family's secrets, but I could also potentially help Marcus reclaim what was legally his. While traditional partnership disputes might be time-barred, ongoing fraud and fiduciary duty violations have much longer limitation periods. Armed with all this information, I'd spent weeks planning exactly how to reveal everything. I'd considered different approaches: confronting them privately, sending anonymous letters, or just disappearing from their lives without explanation. The more I thought about that Christmas morning tradition and how they'd always made me feel like an unwelcome guest in my own family's celebration, the more I realized that Christmas was the perfect stage for my revelation. I'd prepared multiple backup plans. If they tried to dismiss the DNA evidence, I had the emails. If they tried to claim the emails were fake, I had the business records. If they tried to gaslight me about my own paternity test, I had Dr. Henderson's medical notes. I'd even prepared a presentation on my laptop with photographs, documents, and timelines, just in case they needed visual aids to understand the full scope of their deception. The black box had been a last-minute inspiration. I'd wanted something dramatic, something that would capture their attention before I dropped the bombshell. The single sheet of paper inside was just the DNA test results showing Trevor's true parentage, but I'd formatted it to look as official and devastating as possible. I'd also taken precautions to protect myself. I'd already moved most of my belongings out of my apartment and into a storage unit. I'd given my boss a heads up that I might need to take some time off for a family emergency. I'd even consulted with a lawyer about potential harassment or retaliation, though I suspected that once the truth came out, my family would be too busy dealing with their own problems to bother me. "I don't understand," Allison said, looking back and forth between our parents. "What's going on?" I pulled out my phone and showed them the screen. On it was a photo of Trevor and Marcus Rivera side by side. The resemblance was striking, much more striking than any resemblance Trevor had ever had to Robert. "Meet your real father, Trevor," I said. "Marcus Rivera, Mom's former lover and Dad's former best friend." Trevor's face went white. "That's not possible." "Oh, but it is," I said, "and I have the DNA results to prove it. I also have all of Mom's old emails detailing their affair. I have photos she sent him. I have videos they made together. I have hotel receipts, credit card statements, and text messages spanning a 6-month period in 1998. Mom collapsed into a chair, her face buried in her hands. Dad was still staring at the paper, his hand shaking so badly he could barely hold it. "But that's not even the best part," I continued, my voice getting stronger with each word. "The best part is what I found out about why you all have been treating me like an outsider my entire life." I pulled out a manila envelope from my coat pocket and dumped its contents onto the coffee table. More papers, more photos, more evidence. "Dad, remember when I was 16 and I needed a blood test for that sports physical, and you insisted on coming with me to the doctor's office, and had a very private conversation with Dr. Henderson afterward?" Robert's face somehow got even whiter. "Turns out Dr. Henderson kept very detailed records," I said, "including records of the blood test that confirmed I was indeed your biological son, and records of your reaction when he told you the results." I picked up one of the papers from the table and read from it. "Patient Brandon Johnson confirmed to be biological offspring of Robert Johnson. With 99.97% certainty father appeared distressed by results, and requested information not be shared with family members." The room was so quiet you could have heard a pin drop. "You see," I continued, "all these years, you all have been treating me like an outsider because Dad convinced you I wasn't really part of the family. But he knew I was his son. He's known for 12 years that I was his biological child, he just didn't want me to be. Allison's mouth was hanging open. Trevor looked like he was going to be sick. Mom was sobbing quietly into her hands. So let me get this straight, I said, pacing around the room now, feeling more confident than I'd ever felt in my life. Allison, you just gave me a paternity test to prove I'm not part of this family, but I'm literally the only one here who actually is part of this family. Trevor isn't Dad's son, he's the son of Mom's affair partner, and Dad has been lying to all of you for over a decade about my paternity results because he simply didn't want to accept me as his child. I stopped pacing and looked at each of them in turn. The irony is absolutely delicious, isn't it? Brandon, Mom said through her tears. Please, you don't understand. Oh, I understand perfectly, I interrupted. I understand that you've all been emotionally abusing me my entire life based on a lie. I understand that Dad would rather pretend I wasn't his son than actually be a father to me. I understand that you all found it easier to make me the scapegoat than to deal with your own family's problems. I picked up the paternity test kit that Allison had given me and tossed it back to her. You want to know who's not part of this family? Look in the mirror, Trevor. You're Marcus Rivera's son, not Robert Johnson's. Congratulations, you're the actual outsider here. Trevor finally found his voice. This is insane, you're making this up. I pulled out my phone again and played a video. It was a recording of my video call with Marcus Rivera from the week before. In it, Marcus was holding up the DNA test results and explaining how he'd had an affair with Linda Johnson 26 years ago, and how he now realized Trevor was his son. Would you like to call him? I asked. I have his number right here. I'm sure he'd love to finally meet his son. He's been wondering about you for 26 years. The silence that followed was deafening. Dad was still trembling, Mom was still crying. Allison looked like she was in shock, and Trevor looked like his entire world had just collapsed. Here's what's going to happen now, I said, my voice calm and controlled. I'm going to walk out of here, and I'm never coming back. I'm going to go home to my own life, my own success, my own happiness, the life I built without any of you. I started gathering up the evidence from the coffee table, but before I go, I want you to understand something. All those years of making me feel like I didn't belong, all those comments about how I wasn't a real Johnson, all those times you made me feel like an outsider in my own family, that ends today. Because now you know the truth. I looked directly at Dad. You threw away a relationship with your actual son because you were too proud and stubborn to admit you were wrong about me. You chose to believe a lie rather than love your own child. Then I looked at Mom. You let your husband treat our son like garbage to cover up your own affair. You watched him emotionally abuse me for years, and you said nothing because you were afraid your secret would come out. I turned to Allison. You've spent your entire adult life treating me like I was somehow less than you, when the truth is, I'm the only one here who actually belongs to the family you're so proud of. Finally, I looked at Trevor. And you're not even a Johnson, you're a Rivera. Maybe it's time you went and found your real family. I started walking toward the door, then stopped and turned back. Oh, and one more thing, I said. All of this information, I've already shared it with a few people. Uncle Tom knows. Aunt Jennifer knows. Grandma knows. I thought they should understand why I won't be coming to family gatherings anymore. I also thought they should know why their Christmas card should probably be addressed to the Rivera family from now on, at least where Trevor is concerned. The look of horror on Mom's face was worth every moment of pain they'd ever put me through. You told the whole family? She whispered. I told the people who mattered, I said. The people who actually treated me like family over the years. They deserve to know the truth about what's been happening here. That wasn't entirely accurate. I'd actually told them much more than just the family secret. I'd also shared some very interesting financial information that I'd discovered during my investigation. I also thought Uncle Tom should know about the business. I continued, watching Dad's face turn even whiter. You know, the construction company that you and Marcus started together. The one where Marcus is still legally entitled to 50% ownership. Uncle Tom's a lawyer, as you know, and he found it very interesting that you've been operating the business as sole owner for 26 years without ever buying out Marcus's share. Dad's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. Marcus is going to be very interested to learn that the business he helped build is now worth approximately $4.2 million, I said. That's money that rightfully belongs to him, plus 25 years of lost profits and fraudulent concealment. Uncle Tom thinks the fraud and fiduciary duty violations alone could result in a judgment of $3 million or more. I pulled out another document from my coat pocket. This is Marcus's contact information. I'm sure you'll want to reach out to him to discuss transferring his rightful ownership share. You wouldn't want this to get messy in court, would you? The silence in the room was deafening. Dad looked like he might have a heart attack. But wait, there's more, I said, feeling like a twisted game show host. Grandma was particularly interested to learn about the college funds. You know how Trevor's fund was 3 times larger than mine, and how Allison's was twice as large? Grandma had always assumed you were treating all your children equally. She was quite upset to learn otherwise. I looked directly at Allison. Speaking of college, Grandma also found it interesting that you've been teaching at Jefferson High for 8 years but never mentioned that you've been having an affair with the married principal, Mr. Thompson. The photos I found on your social media were quite revealing. I'm sure his wife will find them fascinating. Allison's face went ashen. You didn't. Oh, but I did, I said. Mrs. Thompson deserves to know what her husband has been up to. Just like Trevor deserved to know who his real father is. Just like I deserve to know that my own father has been lying about my paternity for 12 years. I turned back to Trevor. Your real father, Marcus, is actually a wonderful man. He's successful, kind, and he's been wondering about you for 25 years. He has 2 daughters who are excited to meet their half-brother. You're going to love them, and they're going to love you. Unlike this family, the Rivera family actually knows how to treat their relatives with love and respect. Trevor was crying now, overwhelmed by everything he was learning. I don't understand why no one ever told me. Because Mom was selfish and Dad was cowardly, I said bluntly. They chose their own comfort over your right to know your real family. They chose their own reputation over your happiness. They chose lies over love. I looked around the room one more time, taking in their devastated faces. You know what the really sad part is? All of this could have been avoided if you had just treated me like family. If you had just shown me the basic love and respect that every child deserves from their parents and siblings. Instead, you chose to make me the scapegoat for all of your problems. Mom finally spoke through her tears. Brandon, please, we can work this out. We can be a family again. I laughed, but there was no humor in it. A family? Linda? You're not my mother. You're the woman who gave birth to me and then spent 28 years making me feel unwanted. Robert, you're not my father. You're the man who knew I was his biological son but chose to reject me anyway. Allison, you're not my sister. You're a bully who just tried to humiliate me on Christmas morning. And Trevor, you're not even a Johnson. I opened the door and felt the cold December air on my face. The family I wanted never existed. The family I needed was never here. But the family I deserve is out there somewhere, and I'm going to find them. Brandon, wait, Dad called out, finally finding his voice. I'm sorry, I'm so sorry, I was wrong about everything. I turned back one last time. Robert, you had 28 years to be sorry. You had 12 years after you knew the truth about my paternity to make things right. You had countless opportunities to choose love over pride, truth over lies, family over your own ego. You chose wrong every single time. I stepped outside and started walking toward my car. Behind me, I could hear the family falling apart. Mom was sobbing hysterically. Allison was screaming at Trevor about something. Dad was trying to calm everyone down while dealing with his own panic about the business revelations. As I reached my car, I heard footsteps behind me. It was Trevor, running after me in his pajamas and bare feet. Brandon, wait, he gasped. I'm so sorry for everything. I didn't know about any of this. I looked at him, this young man who had grown up thinking he was my brother, who had participated in making me feel like an outsider, who I now knew was actually the outsider himself. Trevor, I said softly, you were just a kid for most of it. I don't blame you for believing what the adults told you, but you're not a kid anymore. You're 25 years old, and you've had plenty of opportunities to treat me better. You chose not to, but I can change, he said desperately. We can be brothers, real brothers. We were never brothers, Trevor, I said. We don't share the same father. We barely share the same childhood considering how differently we were treated. And after today we definitely don't share the same future. I got in my car and rolled down the window. Your real father is a good man, Trevor. Give him a chance. Give yourself a chance to be part of a family that will actually love you for who you are, not who they want you to be. What about you? He asked. What are you going to do? I started the engine. I'm going to build the life I should have had all along. I'm going to find people who value me, who appreciate me, who treat me like family because they want to, not because they have to. Will I ever see you again? He asked. I looked at him, standing there in the snow in his pajamas, crying like the lost child he'd always been. Despite everything, I felt a moment of pity for him. He was as much a victim of our parents' lies as I was, just in a different way. Maybe someday, I said, when you've figured out who you really are and where you really belong. When you're ready to have a relationship based on honesty instead of the lies we grew up with. I don't know how to do that, he admitted. Start by calling your real father, I said. His name is Marcus Rivera, and his number is in that envelope I left on the coffee table. He's been waiting 25 years to meet you. I opened the door and stepped outside into the cold December air. Behind me I could hear Mom breaking down completely, Dad's chair creaking as he rocked back and forth, and Allison and Trevor starting to argue with each other. As I walked to my car, I felt something I hadn't felt in years, free. For the first time in my life, I wasn't carrying the weight of trying to earn their love or acceptance. I wasn't wondering what I'd done wrong or how I could be better. I wasn't feeling like an outsider looking in. The truth was, I'd never been the outsider. I'd been the only one who actually belonged there, surrounded by people who were too caught up in their own lies and secrets to see it. I got in my car and drove away from that house for the last time. I didn't look back. I didn't feel sad. I felt liberated. 6 months later, I heard through the family grapevine that Trevor had reached out to Marcus Rivera and was building a relationship with his biological father. Apparently, Marcus was thrilled to finally know his son and was helping Trevor figure out his identity and his place in the world. I also heard that Mom and Dad were in marriage counseling, trying to work through 26 years of lies and deception. Allison had apparently become the family mediator, trying to hold everyone together while dealing with her own guilt about how she'd treated me over the years. As for me, I bought a house in a different state and started fresh. I built new relationships with people who valued me for who I was, not who they thought I should be. I found love with someone who thought I was amazing exactly as I was. I advanced in my career and found success that had nothing to do with trying to prove myself to people who would never appreciate me anyway. The best part was that I finally understood something important. Being rejected by people who were never capable of loving you properly isn't actually a loss. It's a gift. It's the universe's way of clearing the path for you to find people who will. That Christmas morning when Allison handed me that paternity test, she thought she was delivering the ultimate insult. What she actually did was hand me the key to my freedom. She forced a truth that had been buried for years to come to light, and in doing so she freed me from a lifetime of trying to earn love from people who were never going to give it. The black box I gave Dad that morning contained more than just DNA results. It contained the end of their power over me. It contained the truth they'd all been hiding from. It contained the beginning of my real life. The life where I was valued, appreciated, and loved exactly as I was. Sometimes, the best revenge isn't getting back at people who hurt you. Sometimes, the best revenge is discovering that you never needed them in the first place. Sometimes, the best revenge is simply walking away and building a better life without them. That's exactly what I did, and I've never been happier. The last thing I heard was that Dad had tried to reach out to me through a mutual acquaintance, wanting to make things right. There was nothing to make right. The damage was done, and more importantly, I'd moved on to something infinitely better. Some bridges are meant to be burned. Some families are meant to be left behind. Some doors are meant to be closed forever. That Christmas morning, my sister thought she was showing me that I didn't belong to their family. What she actually showed me was that their family didn't deserve to have me in it. That made all the difference.